What should you do if you don't think you train hard enough? Now, this is a question that I put out on my Instagram stories. I asked the question is, do you think you train hard enough? And a bunch of people came back and said, no, they don't think they train hard enough. Now, this was quite an interesting one to me because then I thought, well, why? Why don't you think you train hard enough? You know, if you go to the gym and you're there, you've made that effort to get there, what is it about the process that you don't think you're actually pushing yourself hard enough? Why do you feel that you're not able to tap into that emotion or that drive to push yourself that little bit further to get the most out of your training? And a few people responded with some interesting things about not able to recover. Maybe it's just about not knowing what to do. Maybe you've got kids, things like that, and you've got competing priorities, so you never really feel like you can give your all to that situation. And again, lots of different people came back with lots of different answers. Therefore, I thought it would be good to have a little bit of a podcast that talks through some of these things and maybe puts your mind at rest when it comes to this notion that you have to train balls or ovaries to the wall all the time, or maybe you have to always be pushing to the absolute limit, training to failure all the time, or else there's not much point. What I wanted to do is create this podcast, A, to kind of give you some more information, but B, to help you kind of really make sense of, do you know what? Maybe you don't have to train hard, in inverted commas, all of the time. Maybe what you're doing right now is actually perfectly acceptable and maybe even in some cases optimal to get you the best results. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the course of the next few minutes in this episode of the show. Now, as usual, as we get started, what I want you to do is, if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, it's really, really awesome if I get reviews and ratings, especially on iTunes, because other places, they don't allow you to leave a little written review. They're a bit crap like that. But if you are on iTunes, a little written review would be absolutely awesome, and a little rating would be absolutely even more awesome. Plus, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel as well. But let's get into this one. So when you've got like this situation of it might be like you're tired, it might be you don't have enough time, it might be you're not able to look after your nutrition, there's going to be something that thinks, well, actually there's some part of life or the way I'm approaching this that means that I'm not able to get the most out of each and every workout that I'm doing, and therefore you kind of have this feeling that, well, is it actually worth it then? You have this perception that because you can't do it to the max, that it's somehow not good enough. Now, that's what we want to be tackling in this episode of the show. So I don't want you to get to the point where you feel like that, because that potentially gets to low motivation. And we all know where that goes. Low motivation goes down this route of, fuck it, there's no point. And therefore you stop going to the gym, you kind of get a little bit more lax with your nutrition, and then you don't end up getting to where you want to get to. So this podcast is about bringing you right back on track to think about, okay, objectively, what is actually going on here? So the thing is that everybody's in a different place. It seems that, again, to use the phrase, you're on a journey, and make you vomit in your own mouth equally as much as I am right now, it's actually true. And the term, are you training hard enough, in inverted commas, is so subjective. It's like, well, who are we talking about? What's their goal? What's their situation? What does train hard enough mean from one person to the next? And I guarantee you it's going to be very, very different. Let's take, for example, someone who is more advanced. Let's go to the very, very extreme. You've got an IFBB pro bodybuilder who spends their life revolving around training and nutrition, trying to get themselves into peak physical condition to be able to win competitions and things like that. Now, their perception and their need to train hard is far greater than someone who is relatively new. Yes, let's say within the first 2 years of training properly. And by training properly, I mean not just throwing weights around aimlessly, actually training properly. Now, in that case, in that scenario, the more advanced athlete really does have to work incredibly hard to get small amounts of muscle gain. Because unless you're drug enhanced, it's very difficult to come by after a number of years to keep building muscle year after year. It's very, very small marginal gains that you're actually after. And to get those marginal gains, you have to train quite hard. It might be you have to go into, you don't necessarily have to do a high volume program, but you might find yourself doing a higher volume program, let's say, and you might find yourself pushing those workouts a little bit harder, closer to failure all the time, because you need to keep pushing the body to create and generate the need for an adaptation, i.e. to get stronger, to build more muscle, so on and so forth. So you can get into these situations where that level of athlete got to push themselves quite hard. Now, does the average person need to do the same? The answer is no. You don't need to push yourself that hard. So you potentially create this gap between you think that you've got to train like this pro bodybuilder, not necessarily like one of the sort of giant freaks, but let's say a person who's got an incredibly good physique naturally that you want to try and emulate or get close to, is that the way they train or what they publish on Instagram or social media is how they train. Now, you don't necessarily need to copy that, but you might feel like you have to because you see this person doing all this sort of stuff, and there you feel, well, I need to do that as well. If I want to look like that, I've got to do that. But okay, they've been training like that for years, maybe even decades, and therefore they started out somewhere completely different. And again, you've got to see where you are on this scale. Now, obviously, I'm talking to thousands and thousands of people on a podcast. I can't tell you specifically where you are as an individual on that scale. You're going to have to use some of your own brain power to figure that out. Where are you on this scale of how hard do I need to train? Now, when you're a beginner, let's talk about beginners. You really don't need to push yourself as hard as you might think you do. Because yes, you're going to have to put the time and effort into working on good form. You're going to have to put the time and effort into actually showing up to the gym. But if we talked about it in terms of, set volume or how close to failure that you have to go, is because this is such a new experience, this is such a new stimulus for the body, you don't need to do a fraction of the set volume that someone more advanced has to do. And you probably don't have to push to failure anywhere near as often. And even for maybe the first 12 to 18 months, maybe even 2 years, you probably don't even need to go to failure at all in order to create an adaptation. Maybe pushing yourself to failure all the time actually works against you. It creates a lot of fatigue, a lot of stress. You have to recover from that. And maybe that does impact the amount that you grow. So really kind of understanding that is the first key step to understanding that this concept of I'm not training hard enough is all relative, and you might actually be training perfectly hard enough. You just have this unrealistic expectation of what you need to do. Now, the next thing you want to think about is some of the language that sits around bodybuilding, if you want to call that, the gym world, gym environment can be quite disempowering. Let's look at progressive overload for one. Now, if you don't know what progressive overload is, I suggest you go back and listen to the podcast that's on progressive overload. But effectively, this is the common concept that people are familiar with most of the time, unless you're brand new, is the case that this is where you're trying to incrementally increase the challenge, the tension, whatever sort of phraseology you want to use on your muscles. So you want to make that muscle progressively get more and more load going through it. Now, overload in that sort of sense gets people to think about just about weight. So it's, I lift more weight, I have more progressive overload. Now that is one way of doing it, but there are another 3 ways of thinking about it. One is more reps. So you could do more reps with the same weight would be more progressive overload. You could do more sets. So rather than doing 3 sets of 100 kilos times 8 reps, you could do 4 sets. Again, you're putting more work through that muscle. It's more overload. You're progressively overloading that muscle. And the other one that people kind of just ignore is your technique, your form. If you can execute an exercise better than you did last week or the week before or the month before or the year before that, or whatever, then again, you are potentially challenging that muscle more. It doesn't have to come down to pure adding weight onto the bar. Now, when you think about it, if you go into the gym with the mentality of progressive overload means more weight on the bar or a heavier set of dumbbells or the pin going further down the weight stack, is that when that doesn't happen week after week, sometimes it might be 2 or 3 weeks in a row that the weight doesn't move, you can get disheartened. Well, I'm not progressively overloading, so maybe it's just a case that I'm not trying hard enough, or I'm not training hard enough, or I'm doing something wrong. Whereas actually, there are other things that you can be focusing in on to improve that progressive overload. And then once you start to use those things, those 4 components of progressive overload together, you would see more consistent progress in the load you use. But don't think you have to go into every single workout and make improvements incrementally with how much weight you lift. That's probably going to be an inefficient way to think about your training and a more efficient way to make your mindset go a little bit freaking crazy. So don't think about it like that. Don't think about it has to be more weight every single week or else this is a crap workout. Don't think about it like that. You've also got the concept of training to failure. Now, training to failure, if you are familiar with bodybuilding terminology and weight training and things like that, it's just a given. Training to failure, we know what it means. But to the uninitiated, the someone new coming into this thing, it can be quite a little bit of a bizarre concept because failure is associated with something negative, something bad, something you are unable to do. Therefore, if you kind of always have this thing of training to failure as a thing, then you can kind of sometimes, again, this is more for the people that are new, but you can finish a workout thinking, well, I didn't quite achieve anything. I don't know if I actually did what I was supposed to do because I kind of failed. So it can create that kind of mindset. And like I said before, as a beginner, you probably don't even need to go anywhere near failure anyway. So if you think about the whole reps in reserve concept, again, if you don't know what that is, there's a podcast on that. That's where you've got these reps left in the tank. So if you think about like a bench press, you're doing your bench press and 0 reps in reserve, i.e. nothing left in the tank, is when the bar is on your chest and you cannot move it 1 inch. That's 0 reps in reserve. You've hit complete concentric failure. Now, therefore, you would work back from that. So nobody really wants to be in that situation where you're being crushed under a bar. So logically, if you're really pushing hard, it might be 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Now, if you're a beginner, you can come way back from there. You don't have to go anywhere near that sort of zone in order to create adaptations because you can do less intense work, you can do less overall set volume and still make great progress. So provided that you're turning up to the gym, provided that you're doing the right exercises for the goal you're trying to achieve, you can actually achieve all of those things without really kind of focusing too hard in on gotta train as hard as fucking possible all the fucking time. So, if you combine all of that together, you might also just think that, I'm just not doing what I should be doing to make progress. And the other sort of trap people get into from a mindset point of view is those people like the people that responded to my Instagram post and said that maybe they were busy mums and things like that. They've got kids at home, they can't get to a gym. So therefore they think, well, I'm not trying hard enough, I'm not training hard enough because I can't get to a gym. Therefore, my home workout is a bit, meh, it's okay, but it's not really going to get me anywhere. Now, in reality, home workouts can be very, very effective. So in the past, I've worked with clients where we use things like suspension trainers like TRX. So you can get those relatively cheaply on Amazon and you can set them up in the home and they can provided you know what you're doing and you've got a good program, a very challenging workout where you can actually you can do resistance training, you can really challenge muscles in very, very different ways, you can be creative with it, and you can get a great workout in 30, 40 minutes, whatever it may be, with one piece of equipment. Likewise, if you're able to get dumbbells, a bench, and things like that, that adds more variety into the mix as well. So you don't really need a huge amount of equipment to be able to make progress. Of course, there may be a point where you start to outgrow that equipment and you want to go to a gym where there's more options, there's more equipment there, there's heavier weights and things like that. But to get you started and to really kind of get some confidence building, then absolutely a home workout with a good structure, maybe a small investment in a little bit of equipment can really pay dividends. So don't think like you're in this situation where if you don't do stuff in the gym, it's pointless. So really kind of don't think that anything other than emulating that person that you're trying to look like is worthless. It's not. Like I said before, if you are beginner, intermediate, you probably don't need to push as hard as those people in order to generate maximum results. It's probably not the case. Obviously, there are going to be people, again, you've got to decide where you are on that spectrum. Is there some people that are going to need to push hard in order to get adaptations, in order to get results? You also got to think about nutrition, lifestyle factors. Is your nutrition on point? Are you recovering? So one of the people that responded to the Instagram post just said recovery is their issue. So again, you've got to be looking at, okay, is my nutrition on point, my protein intake? Are you maybe wanting to favor higher carbs so you've got more energy when you go into those training sessions? Are you prioritizing sleep? Are you trying to reduce stresses in your life so that you can actually recover and go into each and every workout really on the front foot and performing at your best? So as well, if you are short on time, one of the things that you can do is, I've done a podcast previously on a great 30-minute workout. It's something that I use if I'm short on time as well, and it can be a very, very beneficial way to do that. So if you search for 30-minute workouts, you search for muscle mindset 30-minute workout, you'll find it. It's an awesome freaking workout. So just adjust what you're doing to suit your situation and you can get a great workout in. So, and never forget as well, you don't need to be dripping in sweat and sore every freaking day for you to have trained hard. So don't use that as a marker either of, well, I'm not sore as fuck, so therefore I didn't train as hard, or I'm not sitting here in a pool of my own sweat, so therefore I definitely didn't train hard. That's not the yardstick that you need to be measuring by. So hopefully this podcast gave you some insight, maybe put your mind at rest when it comes to, are you training hard enough? Now, like I said before at the beginning of the show, if it did, a rating and review, iTunes would be awesome. Like and subscribe on YouTube as well. And if you want to, there are some links in the show notes where you can find out more information about my one-to-one coaching program, the Lean Life Method, so I can help you get the map, the training program, so that you do know you're training hard enough and in the right way. You can have more information about that by clicking the link in the show notes. Likewise, if you want access to a free calorie calculator, a free training program as well, plus some other cool free shit, there is a link in the show notes below. But for now, all I'm going to say is thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.